Hello, welcome to this next Flip Preaching video. My name's Andy. This week we're looking at Matthew 5, 1-12. We're going to look at this passage and think about what it might mean for us today. This is the bit of Matthew that's sometimes called the Beatitudes, and it's really the first bit of teaching that Jesus gives. So far in Matthew we've been setting the scene, but now Jesus really starts teaching, and this is what takes up most of the book of Matthew. Actually, almost all of it is Jesus teaching, and this is where we start off. It says that Jesus saw some crowds and he went up to the mountain and sat down. Now, mountains are really important all through the book of Matthew. We haven't met one yet in one of these videos this year, but we'll see mountains again and again and again. Just before this, Jesus was taken to a mountain by the devil and tempted. There's this called the Sermon on the Mount. Later on, we'll come to this in a few weeks' time, we have the episode of the Transfiguration, again set on a mountain. There's the Mount of Olives just before the crucifixion, and at the very end of Matthew, he meets his disciples again on a mountain and commissions them to go and make disciples of all people. The mountain's really important. It kind of runs throughout. There are 11 times in the book of Matthew where Jesus goes up and down mountains. Now, which mountain is it meant to be? It's deliberately vague. It says the mountain, not just a mountain, it's the mountain. But I wonder which one it was referring to. It probably wasn't any of either of these, but they probably were meant symbolically to represent it. There are a couple of mountains which were key in the whole Jewish story, and I think that Matthew was wanting to say that Jesus is redoing and remaking these mountaintop experiences for himself. The first one is Sinai. When Moses took the people out of when God, through Moses, rescued the people from Egypt, and they went through the Red Sea, they went to Mount Sinai, and that's where God delivered the Ten Commandments, where he set them apart as his holy people and gave them ways to live. Maybe this is a bit like that, because Jesus so far has kind of been a bit like Moses. We've had the risk around his birth, where the boys were killed. We've had going to Egypt. There are several things which have been a bit like Moses redone with Jesus being the new Moses. And going up the mountain to start his teaching might be a deliberate echo of that. So maybe that's what the mountain means. This is like the new Ten Commandments. Maybe it's Mount Moriah, which was, by legend, the mountain which Abraham took Isaac up to sacrifice him, and God provided another way out. And that is supposed to be the mountain that Solomon built the temple on, which Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, built around, called Temple Mount sometimes, Mount Moriah. Maybe it's referring to that. It says in this Matthew account, he went up to the mountain and he sat down on this mountain. Now, that's possibly a bit like a king sitting on a throne, in which case maybe this is saying this is like Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, Temple Mount. This is the new mountain where everything starts. I'll come back to this later, but the name of the city of Jerusalem is the second half of it is Shalom, which means peace. It's the city of peace, and maybe we need to come back to that later. Okay, so maybe by the mountain theme going through here, maybe it's saying that Jesus is the new Moses, or maybe it's saying that Jesus is re-establishing the religion, but no longer in Jerusalem, but anywhere. This mountain that he sat on in this story, it doesn't say which one, so it kind of represents all places. Okay, then Jesus lets go. He starts to teach the people through this series of Beatitudes, which all begin with the word blessed. They follow the same formula. Blessed are a certain group of people and it tells them the reason why they're blessed. The word blessed is tricky to translate to English. It might mean lucky, it might mean happy, it might mean congratulations. Back in olden days, in Homer, in his Greek stories, it was the gods of Mount Olympus were the ones that were blessed. So Jesus is saying that kind of divine goodness is now yours. Okay, then he lists 9 different situations in which we're blessed. And these are, in a way, describing what life as a disciple is like. This is setting out what it's going to be like. Last week we talked about the calling of the first disciples to leave their fishing nets, which were, remember, they were old and torn and broken. What they were doing before was no longer working, and they were called to follow and become fishers of people. Now, what does that look like? Here we get a bit of an explanation of what that will be like on the ground. Okay, start off. Blessed are the poor in spirit. In Luke's version, which is probably more original, it's just blessed are the poor. But in Matthew, it's blessed are the poor in spirit. People who are... So it's not necessarily about your wealth, but it's about being sort of gentle and meek. And blessed are you when things go wrong. Blessed are you when you're disappointed. Blessed are you when the things that you have built your life upon no longer hold true. Later in the Gospel of Matthew, he lists some people who are the opposite of this. It talks about people who are taking the kingdom of heaven by force. That's in Matthew 11, verse 12. He talks about people who won't become like children. People who won't become like children to inherit the kingdom of God because they won't become poor and humble like those. He talks about people who won't get rid of their wealth. And he talks a lot about the religious leaders who abuse their power to keep people down while keeping themselves in a nice cushy position. The opposite of that is to be poor in spirit, to be gentle. The second one is blessed are those who mourn. And he wasn't necessarily meaning people who are mourning for some person close to them who has died, which is often how we might read this today. In Isaiah 61, which is a classic text, this is the one that Jesus starts off with in the Gospel of Luke. That's the Lord has appointed me to bring good news. In Isaiah 61, it also says, blessed are those who mourn. And what they're mourning for was actually the ruins of Zion, when their city of Jerusalem had been destroyed, when they were taken into exile. And that was happening again. So this is about mourning what's gone before, losing what's gone before. And we will be comforted. Blessed are those who are humble. This is very similar to the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. When we long for God's kingdom to come, there's a state of blessedness in that. When we realise that what we have now isn't what there will be in the future. When we're hungry, when we're longing for God to come and be among us, that's a state of blessedness. Blessed are the merciful. Matthew has been really struck, we think, by Hosea 6:6, where it says that God demands mercy and not sacrifice, because he quotes that again and again in the Gospel. So there's a mention of mercy. That's really important. And blessed are the peacemakers. Remember I said that Jerusalem means city of peace. So blessed are those who make shalom, make peace, rebuild Jerusalem. We think that Matthew wrote this at a time when Jerusalem had just been destroyed by the Romans. They levelled the temple, destroyed every bit. They weren't allowed to loot it even. They had to destroy everything so it couldn't be rebuilt again. And a few people managed to escape. All of the temple priests were executed. They wanted to wipe out this religion once and for all. And Jesus was saying, blessed are those who build shalom. Blessed are those who rebuild. Not in Jerusalem necessarily, but everywhere. Blessed are those who make places of connection with God, make places of peace everywhere. And the last couple are about when we face trials of people accusing us, when we're reviled, when the followers of God find it difficult because other people are attacking them and criticising them and persecuting them, speaking evil of them. And Jesus gets that all the way through the Gospel of Matthew. He faces abuse from people. He faces inaccurate abuse and actually things that he thinks are right, which they haven't caught on to yet. But Jesus gets abuse all the way through the Gospel, and that should be, when we face that, it shouldn't become as a surprise. But when that happens, it says, ours is the kingdom of heaven. God is near when that happens. So these Beatitudes, have a good read through. They're very realistic because they describe what it's like to be a disciple, to be a follower of Jesus. It's a time when we're poor in spirit, when we mourn what we've left behind, when things are tough, when we have to build peace, when it doesn't seem that necessarily anyone else wants that peace. We're to build places of worship where God can connect with people. We're to hunger and thirst for God to be among us, for justice to come, for there to be equality between people, for injustices to be wiped out. All of this is the work of the disciple, and we're promised here that it's a blessed state and that God will be with us, even though it's tough. Okay, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.